We are bad men and for the money.
You want to be a part of history?
Not really.
This might be some new form of Russian propaganda.
In a world where truth is stranger than fiction, our journey through the labyrinth of reality will challenge everything you know. Welcome to the Red Pill Diary. Join me, I'm Lewis, your host, as we dive into the underbelly of our society where secrets lurk and the red pill isn't just a choice, it's a revelation. They say ignorance is bliss, but what if the truth sets you free? Are you ready to see the world for what it is? I've turned the lights on for us. The white-bodied, green and gold pinstripe Learjet 25C turned off the main runway and completed its route through the taxiways to its final stop adjacent to a private hangar at Pudahuel International Airport, located on the outskirts, a small commune of the city of Santiago, the capital. The Learjet's port wing navigation light created a red glow against the wet pavement as a ground crew member locked the stairs and quickly retreated to prepare and prep the aircraft for any return flight. The main cabin door opened, and the smartly dressed young man stepped onto the platform of the short flight of stairs. His long, jet-black hair tossed in the light spring breeze. It was September, but this was Chile, and it was the fall from where he departed less than 24 hours ago. He could hear the whining of the engines cooling and the noise of an active international airport. The lights and large buildings of the capital were visible in the distance. Founded in 1541, Santiago has been Chile's capital since colonial times. Located in a longitudinal valley bordered by the Andes to the east and the Pacific to the west, it is divided into two parts by the fast-flowing Mapocho River, originating high in the Andes, but unfortunately contaminated by high amounts of copper from the significant copper mines in Chile and industrial wastewater located near the river. Two of the three branches of the Chilean government are in Santiago, while the third, the Chilean Congress, is located in Valparaiso, only a short distance away. However, he would not be visiting either. He reached inside his light jacket for his Valderrama wrap Ray-Bans, put them on, zipped his light coat, and grabbed his sizable black duffel. It would be a busy few days before he would return, he thought, as he descended the stairs. Fortunately, the pilots had skirted the rain and the clouds. The brief delay in Miami was providential. He walked briskly to the waiting dark green four-door sedan parked between the open hangar and the Learjet. The trunk and the door simultaneously opened as he approached. He laid the duffel into the trunk and closed the trunk lid smartly. He noticed the two Chilean custom officers standing just outside the hangar door about 30 yards to his right. He waved casually, smiled broadly, and nodded as he walked back to the open rear door, climbed into the back seat of the sedan, and closed it. He would not need custom today, or any other day for that matter, he thought, and smiled as the car moved away from the hangar. He had a delivery to dispatch, a train to catch, and then back to Miami by way of Bogota. It was October 12th, 1970. So before we start the backstory, I just want to raise a few points and then a quick sketch of our trail for the new listeners. Oh, and thank you for all who are following my journey, this journey on the Red Pill Diary, and also thank you for your feedback. First, I realize my discussions do not cover all of the historical issues and interactions, and as some have said, it's oversimplified. Agreed. But one can only cover so much in 20 minutes, and of course, work to keep everybody's attention. Studies have shown that most people don't get past 5 minutes. And in social media, it's like 8 seconds. So, the whole point of this is to look at historical events and then think about its rhyming currently or previous past or right now. And second, my goal really here is to continue to be curious and create a spark, a bunch of questions, not just for myself, but for you. So you'll ask yourself and quite possibly do your research. And lastly, you'll begin to consider, or at least consider if you don't already, the impact of propaganda in every aspect of our culture and question its validity. Don't take anyone's word for things, even mine. Even in historical documents you read, go back to the original source. Look at the back of the bibliography. Go back to the sources where they cite, and then go back one more. Start reading those things and find out for yourself. It's out there. Yes, it may be in an ocean of information, but it's there. Okay, that's it. Now, let's move on to a synopsis of the last 5 episodes. Okay, here's a brief chronological synopsis of the trail that I'm currently on. I'm going to start with 1903, 1904, the province of Panama, the United States was involved in supporting a revolution in Panama. Panama was then a province of Colombia. Also, during a period of time, we encouraged a coup d'etat and then subsequently military intervention in Nicaragua beginning in 1904. against President Zelaya. That's episode 12. 1953, coup d'etat in Iran. Mohammad Mossadegh was the prime minister. That's episode 10. 1954, a coup d'etat in Guatemala. President Arbenez. That's episode 11. 1961, coup d'etat and assassination in Congo of Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. That's episode 9. 1963, a coup d'etat in Vietnam. President Diem in 1963. That's episode 13. So now you have the synopsis of the past 5 episodes. The common denominator, the United States. So let me make one point here clear. This is not about bashing the United States. This is about talking about the history of this country and our conduct in foreign affairs or domestic affairs, and looking at it honestly and constructively, and looking at the things that I or you or we may not have ever been told and are currently relevant because we look at what's going on today and the crisis or chaos internally and externally as a country. We might see some things that are rhyming. With that, I'll leave it and move on to the backstory. So first, we've got to set the stage. So we're at the mid to end of 1960s and the beginning of 1970s. 68 was the presidential election. Nixon was the president and had been the president in 1970 for 2 years. The United States was embroiled in the Vietnam War. Against the backdrop of these other internal issues going on, significant, of course, was the assassination of civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., race riots across the nation, the assassination of presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy, widespread demonstrations against the Vietnam War across America and its universities and college campuses, and violent confrontations between police and anti-war protesters at this 1968 Democratic National Convention, and ongoing race riots in the United States. So that gives you a real brief backdrop of the conflicts and chaos occurring during this decade between 65 and 75. Now, sandwich in there the Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cold War, and then all of those other things that happened between 1953 and 1965 that we've covered in previous episodes. So remember those things as I go now into some definitions that will help frame those episodes, this episode, and future episodes. Let's start with some definitions. A coup d'etat and a military putsch. They share common goals in overthrowing the government, but they differ in nuances of execution and content. So let's start with a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat literally means a stroke of state in French. It's generally a sudden, illegal, and overt attempt by a group, often within the military or the political elite, to unseat the current leadership. Here are some characteristics. I'm going to give you just 2 or 3 of them. Typically involves a small group of individuals who might already hold significant power or influence within the government or military, and its aims to replace the government with either a new regime or a different set of leaders, often with minimal disruption to the state apparatus itself. That's important. Widely used in events like Napoleon Bonaparte's takeover of France in 1799 and the previous episodes 9 through 12, which are only a few that occurred between the 1950s and on. Let's move to the putsch, a military putsch. It is actually a word rooted in German, meaning to thrust or push. But in politics, it's akin to a coup with some subtle differences. And those differences, it's more direct, it's often violent, and sometimes it's less planned, which might involve more strategic or clandestine elements before the overt action. It can be more likely to fail because these putsch are often more localized in ambition or effect, whereas coups are often aimed for a complete takeover of the national government. Let's compare them real quickly. A coup d'etat often involves detailed planning involving multiple branches of government or the military. It might include elements like propaganda, legal manipulation, or economic pressure before the actual seizure of power, whereas a military putsch can be seen as more spontaneous or reactive. It's often driven by immediate grievances or opportunities, like dissatisfaction within military ranks or political instability. That gives you something to refer to if you go back to the previous episodes, this episode, and episodes going forward. But it also gives you a perspective to look at things that are currently going on today, here and around the world. Now I'm going to drop one last thing in here. Now you've heard probably on social media and this strategy been bantered around between them and with different references, etc. It's the Cloward-Piven strategy. This was derived in 1960 by these two professors. And those two professors, I believe one of them was a socialist. The point being is it was designed to deal with poverty in the 60s and having a strategy in order to push for change, for radical changes in internal dynamics within the domestic policy of the United States. It had 4 points. Overload a system, create mass panic and hysteria as the system is overloaded, oversee the destruction of the system, and then replace the former system with a new system. Now I'm just going to leave it right here and ask you one question. Have you seen any of these before? Now, for the cast of characters. First up, for our cast of characters, we're going to deal with the industrial influencers in Chile. First, Kennecott Copper Corporation and Anaconda Copper Mining Company, two gigantic copper mining companies. These two American companies accounted for most of Chile's export earnings and about a third of its tax revenues in the 60s and 70s. The magazine or newspaper El Mercurio, Augustin Edwards was its owner. He was one of the wealthiest men in Chile, and his family is of Welsh origins and still one of the wealthiest families in Chile. And his father was the founder of this newspaper, and it's the leading newspaper in Chile. Next is International Telephone and Telegraph Corporation. It was an international conglomerate with numerous World War II activities. That would be German allegiances, both in Europe and in South America. And subsequent acquisitions, it owned the Chilean Telephone Company. Donald Kendall, CEO of Pepsi-Cola, he was also a business partner of Augustin Edwards. Pepsi-Cola had a large business contract and association with the country of Chile. He also utilized the firm of Nixon, Mudge, Rose, Guthrie, and Alexander, in which Richard Nixon was a partner and handled work for Pepsi-Cola. Now we go to the government cast of characters. John McCone. John McCone was a director of the CIA under Kennedy. He was preceded by Allen Dulles, who Kennedy was forced to resign due to the Bay of Pigs disaster, along with senior CIA staff. He was also on the board of IT&T while still being paid as a consultant for the CIA. He had a number of other jobs in the administrations of other presidents, such as the former Secretary of the Air Force and Atomic Energy Commission. And he married the daughter of the Peugeot fortune, the founder of PACCAR. Richard Helms, you remember him? He was a deputy director of CIA under McCone and then rose to director of CIA and was McCone's conduit to the White House. Now, for the two individuals that were competing for the presidency in Chile, Edward Fry. He was a candidate the American corporations in Washington wanted and promoted to win the 1964 election. They funded his campaign with millions of dollars. He won at that time, and the United States poured hundreds of millions of dollars in Chile to keep Edward Fry looking good and productive, and the American corporations happy with their business endeavors in Chile. Along comes Salvador Allende, who was essentially ran against Fry in the 64 election and lost, but now he's a socialist who claims to be a socialist committed to democracy and one of the first Marxists to be elected in a liberal democracy in Latin America. Both Fry and Allende decided they wanted to do what? They wanted to nationalize the copper and the banks. And we know what happens when that kind of stuff gets proposed. You got it. The U.S. was heavily invested, and they said, that ain't happening, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen. And let the games begin. Now they've got the cast of characters. I want to stop for just a moment here and say, where have we seen this type of connections before? Now, 1954, think Guatemala, United Fruit, and the connections between the CIA, the banking and industry, and the government against a person who wanted to nationalize, in this case in Guatemala, the land, or go forward to from 1953 to 1964. And what did Mossadegh in Iran want to do? He wanted to nationalize the oil. And in both those cases, what did they do? Well, what do you think they're going to do here? Of course, they're going to say, we want democracy. We want to see democracy prosper in Central and South America. And this is a great thing. This is what they want. This is what they've chosen. And we're going to support it. Not. That's not what happened then. And it's not happening now. In this case, as well as in 53, 64, in multiple cases, we're going to see this over again. Because who wins out? the big industrialists who have the money and control both the land in the country and have connections inside the government to turn the wheels to get them what they want to protect their assets, at least what they believe they are. Think about it. If they're pushing for their agenda, they're not thinking about the population of Chile. They're thinking about the people who own the land, or at least they believe they own the land and control this country for their profit and benefit. That's what happened in 1953. That's what happened in 1964. That's what's happening right here in 1970-71. So you say, Lewis, it can't be that bad. Well, let's tee up what happened. Remember that gentleman who landed at the tarmac, Santiago? Well, what do you think he had in that black duffel that he stuck in the back trunk of that green sedan? Automatic rifles for a military putsch to be delivered so they could kidnap a specific general of Operation Schneider. So what was the problem? Well, Operation Fubelt, F-U-B-E-L-T, failed. They failed with the propaganda. They failed with the chaos. They failed to convince the Chilean government to negate or not choose Allende as president. It didn't work. So now they had to go a different route. They identified General Schneider as the weak link, and they made contacts, they being the CIA, made contacts with the other generals of the military and let it be known that they would support them in whatever decision they made. Whatever that decision would be a decision that was favorable towards them and their goal of this military putsch. And the stage was set for the kidnapping of General Schneider. So how do you think that worked out for them? Well, it didn't work out at all. They made the first attempt. Chosen revolutionary types went to his house to kidnap him. Well, he wasn't there. So then they sat and waited for him after he left for work. Well, General Schneider resisted, was shot, and he died 3 days later. It all went south from that point on. Now the government, ours, was in full crisis mode, trying to clean up this mess. Not only did the revolutionary types not use the weapons that they were given, but they messed it up. Our government paid them hush money to leave the country and to protect them so they wouldn't be questioned. Our government even paid life insurance just in case something should happen to them as they helped them leave the country and watch over them so they wouldn't be discovered or questioned about the CIA's involvement in the military putsch. Now, the military putsch transformed into a full coup d'etat, was brought to bear by the United States against the government of Chile and this president. They used propaganda, legal means, and economic pressure. They worked with the military to subvert the power of the presidency and to push them into violence against the president in a military coup d'etat, which succeeded in the death of the president. So what was the result of the coup d'etat sponsored by none other than the United States? Well, let's look at what happened. General Pinochet took office, and in the first month after the coup d'etat, or the first few months, the military killed thousands of Chilean leftists, both real and those they suspected were. They forced others to disappear. They call them the missing. And the military, the Chilean military, imprisoned about 40,000 political enemies, and they stuffed them in the National Stadium of Chile. There was others that were tortured and killed in the missing. There were U.S. citizens that were killed. Songwriters, Chilean songwriter was killed and murdered along with 70 other people in a series of murders perpetrated by a death squad called the Caravan of Death, of course. The government arrested some 130,000 people in this 3-year period of time. The dead and the disappeared numbered thousands in the first months of the military government. During that same time, the junta dissolved Congress. It outlawed the parties that had been part of the Popular Unity Coalition, and all political activity was declared in recess. The government took control of all media, including radio broadcast, and they took the remaining publications and turned into propaganda for the military junta. The military junta was supposed to rotate, but how convenient. They had a meeting and decided, no, they would just allow General Pinochet to be the president going forward. Besides political leaders and participants, the coup also affected many everyday Chileans. Thousands were killed, went missing, and were injured. There was a heavy toll on the people of Chile. Not so for the government of the United States. It's ironic that the one thing the government of the United States wanted to avoid was a country controlled by a dictator. You know, it's another one of those unintended consequences. I'll leave the lights on for you. Well, we filled those pages. If you have comments, suggestions, share them. You know, the more input, the more likely a better outcome. I'm moving forward because backwards is not an option. I've turned the lights on here, and I'll be leaving them that way. Join me next time on The Red Pill Diary.